My beloved child, I need you to quiet your mind for just a moment, and step away from the chaos of your thoughts. Take a slow, deep breath in, and let the peace of this sacred space wrap around you. I see how hard you have fought to stay strong, how many times you wanted to look back, and how much discipline it took for you to choose silence over begging for what was already yours. You walked away not out of anger, but out of absolute self-worth. And I want you to know, that single step you took has shaken their entire spiritual world. For a long time, they believed they held the keys to your happiness. Their ego convinced them that no matter how they treated you, no matter how much distance they created, you would always be there, waiting in the shadows, ready to welcome them back the moment they grew lonely. They took your infinite patience as a sign of weakness. But your sudden, absolute silence has completely shattered that illusion. Last night, the heavy weight of that silence finally broke through their stubborn armor. They sat in the dark, staring at the empty spaces where your messages used to be, realizing that you are truly, completely gone. The realization didn't hit them like a gentle wave, it hit them like a sudden storm. For the first time, they had to face the reality that you are no longer holding on to hope, that you have officially closed the door and handed the keys back to the universe. And that absolute quiet is now the loudest noise in their life. They spent hours replaying the last moments between you, remembering how calm you were when you stepped away. They expected you to argue, they expected you to cry or demand answers, but your quiet dignity terrified them. Last night, they realized that when a gentle soul stops fighting, it doesn't mean they lost, it means they have finally realized their own divine value. They looked at the freedom they thought they wanted, and they realized it feels like an empty, freezing desert without your warmth to guide them. Section 2. My beloved child, I want you to look closely at the journey you have walked since you made the choice to step back. You have had to fight your own heart in the middle of the night, forcing yourself to stay away from a connection that used to be your entire world. You told yourself that if they didn't value your presence, they didn't deserve your words, and so you chose the path of the unseen. You chose to wrap your heart in a sacred boundary, trusting that I would fight the battles you were too exhausted to carry. And hear me clearly tonight, those battles are being won in the deepest corners of their mind. Last night, as the hours crawled into the early morning, your absence became a physical weight in their chest. They went through their daily routine, they smiled for the world. They tried to fill their time with shallow chatter, but the moment the room went dark, the emptiness you left behind rushed in. They realized that your silence isn't just an empty space, it is a reflection of their own failure to protect something beautiful. They looked at their life, and for the first time, they felt completely poor without your love. They began to realize that no matter how many people they surround themselves with, no one speaks to their soul the way you did. They remembered the soft frequency of your voice, the absolute purity of your intentions, and how you stood by them when they were at their worst. Last night, a wave of deep, suffocating regret settled into their spirit as they realized they traded a once-in-a-lifetime blessing for a temporary moment of stubborn pride. They felt an unexplainable urge to break the quiet, but the sheer weight of what they did kept them completely frozen in the dark. Section 3. My beloved child, I want you to understand the divine mystery of what happens when a soul like yours detaches. When you were pouring your heart out, chasing them and trying to make them see your worth, your energy was acting as a shield for their ego. They felt safe, they felt powerful, because they knew your love was unconditional and always available. But the moment you walked away, the moment you stopped sending your warmth across the distance, that shield vanished, leaving them completely exposed to the cold reality of their choices. Your silence has forced them to look into the mirror of their own actions. Last night, they couldn't escape what that mirror was showing them. They sat alone, watching the shadows on the wall, realizing that they have been running away from the only person who truly had their back. They replayed the moments where they brushed you off, the times they made you feel like you were asking for too much, when in reality, you were just asking for the bare minimum of honesty and care. A heavy, piercing truth settled into their chest last night: they didn't break you, they broke themselves. They realized that the independent, careless lifestyle they were trying to build feels completely hollow. They looked at their achievements, their plans, and the superficial paths they have chosen, only to realize that none of it brings them joy because they cannot share it with the one person who knew their soul. They are starting to understand that you were a sacred gift from the universe, and they handled that gift with careless, ungrateful hands. They felt a deep, magnetic pull to reach out, a spiritual restlessness that made it impossible for them to find a single moment of peace. Section 4. My beloved child, I want you to hold your head high tonight and recognize the massive power of your own dignity. You have spent so many days wrapping yourself in a quiet strength, refusing to beg for the crumbs of their attention. You have looked at your own wounds, and instead of calling out to the one who caused them, you chose to bring them directly to my feet. You surrendered the steering wheel of this connection, choosing to trust that if something is truly meant for you, it will never require you to lose yourself to keep it. But what you do not see is how much your dignified distance is turning their world upside down. Last night, the illusion of their complete independence came crashing down to the floor. They sat at the edge of their bed, looking out into the cold, empty night, realizing that the silence between you is getting wider with every passing second. For months, they thought they could just put your memory on a shelf and return to it whenever their ego needed a boost. But last night, they felt the terrifying truth that you have actually moved your energy away from them for good. And that realization brought a sudden wave of absolute panic to their chest. They began to realize that while they were busy playing childish games with time, you were busy stepping into your highest, most beautiful vibration. They saw your growth from afar, they felt the shift in your frequency, and they realized that you are becoming the absolute best version of yourself entirely without them. They sat there in the dark, wondering how they could have been so blind, how they could have let a soul so pure, so grounded, and so incredibly rare just slip through their fingers. They felt a deep, piercing fear that they have finally been permanently replaced by your peace. Section 5. My beloved child, I hear the silent prayers you whisper into the dark when the world is fast asleep. You look at the horizon, you look at the timeline of your life, and sometimes a tiny shadow of doubt creeps into your mind. You ask yourself if they even notice that your warmth is gone, or if they have simply erased your name from their heart and moved on into a new story. You have had to master the art of looking perfectly okay to the outside world, hiding the deep ache of a bond that was torn apart by pride. But what your human eyes cannot see is that your silence has become an unstoppable storm in their spiritual realm. Last night, the universe completely stripped away every single excuse they had been using to justify the distance. They sat in the quiet, watching the hours tick away, realizing that the freedom they fought so hard for feels entirely like a prison of their own making. For a long time, their ego felt completely safe because they knew your love was a constant, unshakable foundation always waiting for them. But last night, they felt the cold, sharp reality that the foundation is no longer there. And that emptiness sent a deep chill straight to their soul. They began to dissect the last words you ever spoke to them, replaying the tone of your voice in their mind over and over again. They realized that you gave them more chances than anyone else ever would, that you looked past their flaws and offered them a pure, unselfish love that people spend entire lifetimes searching for. A heavy, suffocating wave of longing took over their heart last night, as they stared at their phone, wanting so desperately to break the quiet, but feeling entirely too guilty to step back into the light you carry. Section 6. My beloved child. I want you to take a slow, deep breath, and feel the absolute stillness of this present moment. You have carried the weight of this silence for so long, protecting your peace like a sacred flame in the middle of a heavy storm. You have watched them from a distance, seeing the masks they wear, and you have had to remind your heart every single day that their lack of response is not a reflection of your worth, but a reflection of their own internal chaos. You chose to surrender your words, choosing instead to let your absence speak the truths that your presence could never make them understand. But what you do not realize is that your absolute silence has finally achieved what your words never could. Last night, the illusions they built around their life completely collapsed into pieces. They sat in the dim light of their room, listening to the heavy quiet, and they realized that they are completely, utterly exhausted from running away from your memory. They looked at the superficial world they chose over your sacred love, and they felt a profound sense of emptiness that shook them to their very core. They realized that by choosing their stubborn pride, they didn't win a battle. They just managed to isolate their own soul from the only true source of warmth they had left. A deep, unexplainable wave of sorrow settled into their chest last night. They began to remember the way you used to stand by them, the unconditional support you gave when they had nothing else, and the absolute sincerity in your eyes whenever you looked at them. They realized that in a world where everyone is looking for what they can take, you were the only one who came with open hands, wanting nothing but to offer them a safe place to heal. They sat there until the dawn broke, mourning the loss of a connection that was blessed by the heavens, terrified that they have pushed you so far into the dark that you will never look back again. My beloved child. I want you to look closely at the shift happening in the unseen world. You have carried the heavy burden of thinking that your silence meant you were easily forgotten, but the truth is, your absence has become an unyielding weight on their spirit. They tried to walk away with their head held high, pretending that they could find another light just as bright as yours, but the universe does not allow a sacred bond to be dismissed so easily. Your quiet withdrawal has left them completely exposed to their own thoughts. Last night, as the world became perfectly still, they sat alone with the choices they made. They looked at the superficial distractions they chased, the temporary validation they sought from crowds and shallow connections, and a sudden wave of reality hit them. They realized that nothing they have found since leaving you has any true substance. The empty chatter of others has only made them realize how profoundly they miss the quiet, effortless understanding that always existed between your souls. A deep, unexplainable ache took root in their heart last night. They began to remember the way you used to look at them, not with judgment, but with a pure, unconditional warmth that made them feel safe enough to put down their heavy walls. They realized that you gave them a sacred sanctuary, and in their foolish rush to protect their own stubborn ego, they threw it all away. They spent hours staring into the dark, wishing they could turn back the clock, feeling a fierce and desperate longing to feel your comforting energy just one more time. I want you to step fully into your power tonight and stop wondering if you were wrong for choosing this quiet path. You spent months giving everything you had to a connection that left your soul feeling completely exhausted and drained. You chose to pull your hands back, to wrap yourself in a beautiful armor of absolute detachment, and to let my divine hands handle the scales of justice. And hear me clearly, those scales are tipping in your favor with every single passing day. Last night, the heavy silence between you became absolutely unbearable for them. They sat in the deep hours of the night, listening to the emptiness of their own room, realizing that they have lost the only person who truly cared for their spirit. They tried to tell themselves that they were doing fine, they tried to pretend that the distance didn't bother them, but their own heart completely refused to believe the lie anymore. The illusion of their complete happiness has entirely shattered into pieces. They began to realize that your absence is not just a temporary phase. It is a permanent void that is draining the color from their entire life. They replayed the very last conversation they had with you, remembering how quiet and dignified you were when you chose to walk away. A sharp, piercing wave of absolute regret hit their chest as they realized that they traded a lifetime of sacred, unconditional love for a fleeting moment of petty pride. They felt an unexplainable, overwhelming urge to reach out. But the sheer guilt of how they treated you kept them completely frozen in the quiet. Do not let the physical distance make you believe that your value has been diminished in their mind. You have walked through a very long, painful desert of testing, teaching your heart to remain perfectly still while the universe uncovers the truth. You surrendered your need for revenge, choosing instead to let your complete silence be the final boundary they could never cross. And that quiet boundary is now driving them to the absolute edge of their own patience. Last night, as the cold hours of the morning settled in, they came to a terrifying realization. They looked at the path they chose when they allowed you to walk away, and they realized it has led them to an absolute dead end. They tried to substitute your sacred healing energy with the loud noise of the crowd, with shallow validation, and with temporary distractions that mean nothing to their soul. But last night, the noise completely stopped working. They felt the terrifying chill of a life where your light is truly, completely gone. They began to remember the purity of your intentions, how you used to hold them in your prayers, and how you loved them even when they were completely undeserving. A heavy, suffocating wave of longing settled over their spirit as they looked at the bridge they so carelessly burned. They sat there in the dark, baring their soul to the quiet, weeping for the loss of the only connection that was ever truly blessed by the heavens, terrified that they have broken it beyond repair. I want you to look back at the tears you shed in the quiet hours of your past, and realize that not a single one of them was ignored by the heavens. You have spent a long time rebuilding your spirit block by block, choosing to focus your beautiful energy on your own growth and your own connection to the divine. You wrapped your heart in absolute dignity, refusing to step down from the high altar of your self-worth. But what you do not see is that your healing has left them completely stranded in their own confusion. Last night, the absolute weight of your detachment became a permanent, unavoidable reality to them. As they sat in the quiet hours before dawn, they realized that your energy has completely pulled back from their life. For the first time, they felt the terrifying truth that you are no longer waiting for them, that you are no longer hoping for their return. They looked at the freedom they thought they wanted, only to find that it feels like a vast, freezing winter without your light to keep them warm. A profound, undeniable panic settled into their chest last night. They began to remember the way your voice could instantly lower their anxiety, the way you understood the heavy secrets they never even had to say out loud. They realized that they traded a deep, soulful connection that was blessed by the divine for cheap, superficial validation that leaves them feeling completely empty. They sat there watching the clock tick, realizing that your absence is not just a temporary break, it is a massive, echoing void that is draining the soul out of their entire existence. I want you to take a slow, deep breath, and feel the absolute victory of your soul tonight. You have walked through the fire of their neglect, and instead of letting it burn away your softness, you used it to forge an unbreakable shield of self-respect. You stopped looking for answers in a place that only gave you silence, and you handed the entire connection over to my divine judgment. And tonight, that judgment is echoing deeply within their spirit. Last night, they reached the absolute breaking point of their own stubbornness. As they watched the world remain perfectly still under the midnight sky, the heavy realization hit them that they cannot outrun your memory. They tried to tell themselves that they were happier without the depth of your love, but their own soul refused to carry the lie any longer. The fake smile they wear for the world completely slipped away, leaving them alone with the cold truth of what they have lost. A heavy, suffocating wave of deep regret took over their entire heart last night. They began to replay the very last moments before you chose to walk away, remembering how your voice didn't carry hatred, but an absolute, quiet finality. They realized that you gave them a rare, sacred love that most people spend lifetimes searching for, and they handled it with completely careless hands. They sat there in the deep dark, their tears falling silently, mourning the beautiful bridge they so foolishly burned, feeling an overwhelming, desperate need to find their way back home to your light. I want you to anchor your heart in the absolute truth of who you are. You have spent so many sleepless nights wondering if your absence would ever sting their conscience the way their neglect stung your heart. You chose to pull your beautiful energy back into your own cocoon, deciding that your love was far too sacred to be treated as an option. And tonight, that dignified choice has become a blazing fire in their thoughts. Last night, as the heavy darkness wrapped around their room, they could no longer escape the ghost of your memory. They tried to distract themselves with late-night scrolls and empty conversations, but every single thing they looked at reminded them of your pure, unselfish nature. They realized that the world outside is cold, transactional, and demanding, while your presence was the only place where they could truly breathe without a mask. A deep, piercing wave of absolute loneliness gripped their entire soul last night. They began to remember the small, quiet moments. The way you used to pray for their success, the way you noticed the subtle sadness in their eyes when no one else cared, and how you stood like an unshakable wall behind them. They looked at the superficial people they chose over you, and a sharp truth cut through their ego. They traded a golden, divine connection for cheap, temporary stones. They sat at the edge of their bed, head in their hands, completely broken by the realization that your silence is the direct consequence of their own ungratefulness. Do not let a single doubt whisper to you that your silence was a mistake. When you walked away from that table of emotional crumbs, you didn't do it to punish them, you did it to honor the divine light that I placed inside your soul. You chose to surrender the battle, trusting that my cosmic laws of balance would handle what your words could no longer fix. And right now, those laws are creating an absolute storm in their psychological realm. Last night, the comfort of their denial completely washed away. As the clock ticked past the midnight hour, they felt a terrifying, spiritual pull toward your energy, a pull that they could not block or ignore. They realized that by pushing you away with their cold behavior, they didn't gain their independence, they just managed to starve their own soul of its only source of true spiritual nourishment. An overwhelming sense of panic and urgency took over their heart last night. They unlocked their phone, staring at your chat box for what felt like an eternity, typing out paragraphs of apologies only to delete them out of sheer shame. They realized that your dignity is so high now, and your energy is so clean, that they cannot just step back into your life with cheap, empty excuses. They sat there in the silence, weeping over the beautiful, sacred bond they so carelessly shattered, feeling completely paralyzed by the fear that you have outgrown them permanently. Listen closely to the whispers of the universe tonight and feel the deep peace that is rightfully yours. You have spent a long time washing the stains of their rejection from your spirit, choosing to focus entirely on your healing, your strength, and your alignment with my divine path. You have become a warrior of quiet resilience, refusing to lower your standards ever again. But what you do not realize is that your absolute detachment has left them completely lost in the dark. Last night, they finally faced the raw, unedited truth of their reality. They looked at the timeline of your connection and realized that you gave them every single piece of your heart before you finally chose to close the door. They realized that you didn't leave because you stopped loving them, you left because you finally started respecting yourself. And that specific realization is what is breaking their stubborn armor into tiny pieces right now. A heavy, suffocating cloud of deep, permanent regret settled over their mind last night. They remembered the warmth of your smile, the sacred safety of your love, and the absolute purity of your devotion. They realized that in a world full of users and deceivers, you were a rare, heaven-sent blessing that they treated like an ordinary stone. They sat alone until the first rays of dawn broke through the window, staring into the emptiness, completely broken by the heavy truth that your silence is the loudest and most powerful answer you could have ever given them. My beloved child, as this chapter of deep realization closes, I want you to look forward with absolute faith. Your walk into the silence was not just a test of their heart, it was the final preparation for your own divine elevation. By choosing to step away from the emotional chaos, you have cleared the space for the true, abundant blessings that have been waiting to enter your life. You have proven that your spirit is no longer available for anyone who treats you like an option. The universe has fully recorded your strength, and your reward is on its way. Last night, while they were drowning in the heavy weight of their regret, the light around you grew brighter. You have broken the heavy cycles of the past, and you are stepping into a season of absolute peace, emotional clarity, and unconditional love that will never require you to beg or explain your worth. Let them heal in the quiet distance you created, and trust that whatever belongs to your highest destiny will always find its way to you in my perfect, unshakable timing. Type Amen to claim your peace and your divine blessings tonight, and remember, you are forever protected in my light.